dominant actors in the society or in a given polity. Everybody doesn't frame law. So laws, rules and regulations, national or international, reflect the prevailing power configuration in a given society or the international community. So when we study law at home, the domestic law or international law, this particular factor should be kept in mind. But then where are the problems? The problems are, laws are not necessary if people are angels. Laws are not adequate if people are devils. But then there are angels and devils in the society. That is why laws and regulations are useful. To use a more value-neutral term, there are lawmakers, there are law breakers, there are law followers, there are law interpreters. Now, the devil is always in the detail. And when a legal matter is politicized, law undergoes a change through amendments, interpretations, or even abandonment. And there are victors and losers in the process. I'm just theorizing, conceptualizing. But to give a few examples, very quickly I'll give you one example of the Pressler Amendment. The Pressler Amendment said that if the Pakistani government would detonate a nuclear device, then all kinds of American assistance, military or economic, would be stopped. And in the 1990s, the senior Bush administration imposed Pressler law against Pakistan. But very clandestinely, quietly, they started giving nuts and bolts and other kinds of equipment to, for F-16 and other equipment of America in Pakistan. Nobody knew about it. The moment an American congressman comes to know about it, then there was a hue and cry in the American Congress. And then the State Department fellow who was asked to come and testify, he says, according to the legal advisor of the State Department, the Bush administration has not violated any law. Then Larry Pressler, the person who really introduced the legislation, he stands up and said, I am the person who made the law, and you are telling me it's not violative of the law? Then the State Department fellow says, I will give you a certificate from the legal advisor that it is not violative. 1 week later, a letter does come. It is written, it is not violative of law, but not signed by anyone. This is the politics. Number two, I'll give you one more example, very recent example. India had to go through the NSG and the IAEA and so many issues just to have a civilian nuclear cooperation with the United States. Suddenly China comes and says, I'm going to give 2 more reactors to Pakistan. China does not go to the national security, the NSG. And then China says, I grandfathered these reactors. This is the politics. You can interpret the law the way you want, and because you are China and rising power, nobody can do anything about it. It was MTCR. Then the CIA is telling State Department, you want me to testify in a court of law and show you the evidence, take pictures? It's not possible. So this is where, even if the laws are there, it can be politicized, it can be interpreted, and nothing can happen. What happens when a set of laws are abused or disregarded or not followed? Just to cite a few examples quickly. There are abundant examples of political leaders, even in this country, going scot-free, despite soiling their hands in corruption cases. Now, a chief minister in India, I'm citing a report, newspaper report, a chief minister in India has been proven guilty in corruption cases, still continues to be chief minister. Now, Indian parliament is unable to function for the last several weeks because of corruption cases being debated there. The Arab countries, for instance, particularly the UAE, Dubai, not implementing the money laundering laws. This I came to know from the WikiLeaks because the Americans are really cheesed off that laws are there, but the UAE government is not implementing them. The Saudi government is not implementing them. How do we stop the financing, the sources of financing for the terrorist groups and all that? Not only that, even a country like Russia, it is really grieving that 120 trillion rubles are being transferred without any law, without anything. So I gave you 3 examples. There are hundreds of examples of this. Much closer to home, Pakistan officially fights Taliban, takes the money from Americans, and part of it goes to Taliban. I mean, how do you fight all these cases and all that? No national or international law exists today to punish a nuclear black marketeer like Abdul Qadir Khan in Pakistan. How do you do it? A large number of countries and a large number of American people did not see any humanitarian reason or even legal reason when President Bush intervened in Iraq. And Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said this is an illegal war. What can you do? Or what has been done about the person who intervened in Iraq? You can't do anything about it. More recent example, just about day before yesterday, the African countries are craving that at Cancun, one of their members, Kenya, is actually voicing his master's voice, that is Japan. Because the African countries had one single voice on environmental issues. Now here Kenya comes and says that Kyoto Protocol should not be extended. Somebody found out that a Japanese economic advisor who is working in the Prime Minister's office in Kenya actually wrote the speech and the PM read it out at Cancun. I'll conclude now, because of lack of time, very quickly in bullet forms. What are my conclusions? National legal systems are not adequate anymore to meet the challenges posed by the unconventional security threats. International laws or international norms on human rights related issues are not always compatible with national laws. And how do you handle when the national law and international law are not compatible? For example, people who are studying human rights law, they know very well that there are so many conventions there. But the Chinese are coming up and saying that there is nothing called universal human rights laws. We are Oriental societies, we have different kind of culture, we have different kind of understanding, and your concept of human rights is not applicable to China. So how do you do when there is incompatibility between the two? Number two, international laws have a good record of compliance. There is no doubt about it. Sometimes it is better than even national laws, but only as far as private international law is concerned. As far as the national security issues, drugs trafficking, combating terrorism, preventing or punishing corruption or crimes are concerned, international legal measures are insufficient, or even if they are there, they lack safeguards against abuse and misuse by countries. Number three, the global governance in an atmosphere of anarchy lacks the enforcement mechanism. Everybody knows it. But even the ability to protect human rights, alleviate poverty, prevent drugs trafficking, deal with rampant corruption, or eliminate terrorism. All these are sources of threat to peace and security. India, as a nation, faces these tremendous challenges that I said just now. The political and economic geography has not blessed India. India is sandwiched between the golden triangle and the golden crescent of drugs production. India has a long border with a country which is not only the epicenter of terrorism but also incubator of terrorism. And geography has not blessed us. And then income inequality, abject poverty, lopsided development, and absence of social cohesion in India have contributed to spread of, as General Lambier said, Naxalism. Root cause. Now, last but not the least, corruption has spread like a cancer in the Indian society. Most worrisome is the infection of the disease called corruption has spread even to the judiciary. Without going into the details, I'll just highlight quickly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 headlines of the newspapers to tell you how corruption is becoming a very big security threat to Indian citizens. A. Justice Sumitra Sen of Calcutta High Court to be impeached for misusing public funds, November 10, 2010. B. 3 judges of Allahabad High Court used staff provident fund to buy groceries, pay beauty bills, 30 July 2010. 3. A Dalit person seeks non-Brahmin judge for trial in Gujarat High Court, 17 October 2010. 4th, lawyer gives evidence of corruption against 8 former Chief Justices of Indian Supreme Court, 19 September 2010. Something rotten in Allahabad High Court, says Supreme Court, 27 November 2010. Now, the list is longer, and I'm not going into the details, but the headlines are scary to me as an individual. What is the solution? Is Tom and Jerry game going to go on? Or some kind of Ram, Ravan, Krishna, Kans war is going to take place? I don't know. Let's debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think, rather than trying to summarize some of their points, I think it sets up our next speaker very well. Because what you heard from General Lambier is the dimensions and the importance of being honest about the sources of internal stability in India, or instability in India, and the fact that we should not depend on outsiders to solve our Pakistan problem or any other problem. Professor Mahapatra expanded the spectrum of issues that he's looked at, and I think talked about a very important issue, that is the weight of natural resources and capabilities and how they interplay with law and lawmaking and the capacity to implement. And of course, when you subvert a system with the introduction of corruption as an element, then of course all of these capacities are put to stress. Let me now introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Seema Gehlot to my left. And mind you, all of you, we now also, I've just been told, have a fourth speaker, so we have to budget for a little more time and be even more judicious in the use of our time. Seema is an assistant director in the University of Georgia, where she's also a professor, and the assistant director of a Center for International Trade and Security. I also realized belatedly that I have not even mentioned my name to any of you. My name is Anupam Srivastava, and I'm not only a part with Seema of this center that I'll describe to you, but also somebody who's worked with the Indian government at the highest levels for about 20 years, including working on task forces that were reported as high as the National Security Advisor or the Prime Minister. So I work very heavily with the defense and security establishment, and that is the capacity in which I'm speaking today. The center that Seema represents here has specialized in what are called export controls and non-proliferation, which means how do you help write up laws and implementing regulations to help regulate the trade in dual-use technologies. These are technologies, as I mentioned earlier, for commercial applications, but in the center's case specifically related to the making of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons or missiles. The work of the center is now in across 75, probably 80 countries, where there is a hands-on assistance to governments to write these regulations, train their staff and try to implement it in those countries. So various amounts of training, and some key private companies around the world that also are producers of these technologies and therefore need to also protect them. That is the perspective in which, or vantage point from where her remarks are to be addressed. And I'll also mention that the work of the center is now increasingly with the UN Security Council and with the International Atomic Energy Agency. So based on that vantage point, her remarks will address how taking a step forward from Professor Mahapatra's, that the anarchy in the international system means that domestic laws cannot easily be implemented because of legal interplay, politics. She's now talking about the international dimension of the framework that's coming to us as nations from the international system, and what do we do about that? Seema?
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking the International Council of Jurists for organizing this panel and allowing us to speak about it to the legal community. My remarks, actually, Professor Mahapatra's remarks provide a perfect segue into what I was going to say. He mentioned the proliferation network run by Pakistani scientist Abdul Qadir Khan. He's also at length talked about how there is anarchy at the international system and the lack of regulations at the domestic level. What I'm going to talk about is how some of the revelations about this network that A.Q. Khan was running, which was truly multinational, how it has actually affected international opinion and coalesced it towards passing a resolution. So Security Council actually passed a resolution called 1540 or 1540 for short, precisely aimed at closing those loopholes. Now, what was this network doing? It comprised of course, it was headed by the father of the Pakistani nuclear program, Dr. Khan. He had his associates all over the world, in about 25 countries of the world, both in the developed and developing world. And they were supplying. They had set up a network to supply what Anupam's referred to as dual-use technologies, materials and expertise to a number of countries. Among them, North Korea, Libya, Iran, and several others that the international community does not actually have proof of yet, but it is suspected that they were supplying to others as well. When the revelations came about A.Q. Khan and his network, several governments around the world were implicated in this, but they got off on because there was plausible deniability. What they said was, these are things that are